Right, it's recording. There we go. So what he had goes on last time was he was introducing you to the idea of mental skills training, what it was involved, and what you were kind of going to expect over the next kind of 9 to 12 months. This time around, it's a little bit different. So all the workshops you have from now on split into 2 sections. The first one is a workshop on a particular topic within the field of sports psychology. And then the second half is more about kind of having a group Q&A around how can we continue working on the work booklet and me answering any questions you may have. John, can you make me aware of where were they up to with the work booklet? What have they completed up to?
So they have had a go at completing M2,
okay.
But we didn't get them to actually set a specific set of goals for M3 and then submit that. So what we're expecting is on the back of today is for them to finish off M1 and M2, which they should have been able to do quite comprehensively. But that might be where today they can ask any of those questions related to those mental skill components. But certainly to set a specific pair of goals so that they can work on, obviously, as we approach coming back into playing handball, as that is relevant to us in our situation.
Okay, great to hear. So this workshop makes things even more helpful then, because this one is kind of a follow-on to me introducing the idea around how thoughts influence how you behave, how you perform, and how you feel. And this workshop is a little bit more around how can you actually manage them, how can you control them, how can you manipulate them so you can actually, they can benefit you in terms of you performing well and having helpful behaviors. A lot of this workshop is based around the idea of self-reflection, developing your self-awareness of what typical thoughts you have in certain situations. And when it comes to setting goals, self-awareness is probably one of the key ingredients, especially when it comes to evaluating your performance strengths and your performance weaknesses. You need to know personally where are you at with each mental skill. So hopefully by me introducing you some ideas around how to make effective self-reflection, how to develop your own self-awareness of your thoughts, it's going to benefit you going forward in terms of the work booklet, but also in everyday life. So these are kind of 3 main topics we're going to focus on within thought management. The first one is just increasing your awareness of a thing known as automatic thoughts. So when I mean automatic thoughts, it's a little bit different to me saying, what am I thinking right now? Automatics fall within a category called subconscious. So it's when you're within a certain situation, it's thoughts that are automatically getting generated by the situation that you're within. You don't necessarily have control of it. It's just automatically generated. And these are the thoughts that actually have the most impact in terms of positive or negative. So a great example of this is if you make a mistake, automatically, you'll probably start thinking negatively. If you're not aware of that, your subconscious will guide your behaviors, and it will probably guide you towards behaviors that aren't going to help you in the long run during a game. The second part of it, we'll then move on to, once you identify what typical thoughts you have in different situations, we'll then look at how can you manage these automatic thoughts, attitudes, and beliefs. And then finally, this is the key part, how can you learn and practice to follow the right paths, or the right thought paths, as I call them. And the 2 paths there, because I see there's 2 types of things. There's things known as helpful thinking habits, and unhelpful thinking habits. The better people out there are able to dictate which path they can go down, first of all, so they can see a choice. And then secondly, they choose to follow the path of thoughts that can help them, benefit them in terms of the performance in everyday life. So this is probably going to be more like a refresher slide for you girls. This is just a kind of like a 3-step phase of how thoughts influence your behaviors. And again, it all starts off with how you think. And like I mentioned, automatic thoughts fall under the subconscious mind. And you might not be aware of this, but the subconscious is responsible for up to 90% of our decisions, the behaviors that we perform, how we perform, and also the information we process. So that's the feedback we're thinking about and the feedback we take on board from other people. So if it's responsible for up to 90% of your decision making, it's obviously very important to be aware of how can you manipulate it and how can you control it. Unfortunately, a lot of us lack the self-awareness of these automatic thoughts in the subconscious, because the subconscious is below our conscious awareness, so we're not aware of it. So what I'm going to hopefully teach you is a few skills that help to increase that self-awareness, so you can start to control your subconscious a little bit more. Secondly, it's also responsible for your behavioral habits. And like I mentioned in the first workshop, behavioral habits are things you do on a daily basis. You do them automatically. And a lot of your behaviors, a lot of your routines are based on control through your subconscious. So again, if you can learn to manipulate your subconscious more often, again, hopefully you can perform more effectively and more efficiently during games and any tasks that you may be doing. Okay, so often when it comes to a typical site, they ask you, what are you thinking? So when you're talking about being stressed in the game, the first thing they ask you, what were you thinking? And it is so difficult to think about what you're thinking first. So I kind of follow a different scenario. So the first thing I ask people is go, what context are you evaluating? So for you to reflect on anything, it needs to have a purpose. You need to choose why you're doing it, what you're focusing on. So the context could be the last game that you just had. Then a good way of starting out trying to find out what you're thinking is by focusing on what you're feeling, because people tend to be more in tune or more self-aware of what emotions they're experiencing. So for example, you might say, oh, I was feeling anxious, I was feeling frustrated. Once you've got those first few emotions in your mind, then you can ask yourself, right, why was I feeling those emotions? Because the thoughts are behind the emotions. They're the reasons you felt a certain way. So by doing that, you then identified some simple thoughts, and then you can start to do like an exploration sort of thing. So what my recommendation is, when it comes to, again, just observing what you're thinking in typical situations and looking at the key ones, what were your automatic thoughts in certain situations? Ask yourself, firstly, what emotions were you thinking? Because typically when you're 16, 17, that's something you're more self-aware of. Kind of adolescent youth athletes, they struggle a bit more with identifying what thoughts they have. So by starting off with your emotions first, you can then work backwards in a sense, then look at the thoughts that are attached to those emotions that you experienced. So self-reflection. You've probably hopefully read a bit about this in some of your modules, some of your schoolwork. A lot of these, the workbooks that you do within DiSE is based around effective, accurate, and rational self-reflection. But it is a very difficult skill to master. And what I'm going to do is just kind of give you a few basic principles to follow, a few rules to follow that can help you out. Some people find self-reflection quite difficult because sometimes they think it's about you only kind of reflect on the bad things or the things that have gone wrong. And if they're particularly traumatic experiences, you won't want to experience them. You won't want to replay them. And the first thing I always talk about is self-reflection is there to help you, not there to hurt you. It's only going to give you information that can help you thrive, grow, and develop as a person and as an elite athlete. So it's pretty much defined as paying attention to yourself and what your thoughts are, what your feelings are, and what your beliefs are. It's known as introspection. You focus on yourself and no one else. And these are kind of some of the key rules that I would suggest that you could follow when it comes to reflecting on anything in your life, whether it's psychology, whether it's fitness, whether it's your nutrition. The first thing is ask yourself open-ended questions. Because if you ask yourself closed questions, like yes or no ones, you're not going to get a lot of information. And it's important when it comes to reflection that you have a lot of information on board and a lot of different perspectives that you can take on. The second one is follow a curious and non-judgmental approach. Often if you go into reflection and a negative mindset or with emotions, it can kind of distort the reality or the facts that you take from reflection. So it's really important to think about it from a third person perspective. Sometimes I like to think about I'm the coach evaluating myself. So that way it removes some of the emotions. Ask the right type of questions. That's a key one. So what you're reflecting on, again, focus on the positive aspects, focus on things that can help you grow, the important information. Don't ask things that are useless and don't waste your time. Give self-reflection the time it deserves. And this is probably a key one. People think self-reflection can be a really quick process. And often when you do that, the kind of quality of the information you take on board isn't very, very good. And 9 times out of 10, it won't really benefit you. So what I recommend is if you are going to spend the time reflecting on something, sit down, give yourself plenty of time so you can really reflect in detail about what has happened in that situation. And finally, have a purpose behind self-reflection. Don't do it for the sake of it. Because as you'll find in the first few times you do it, it is quite demanding, quite energy draining. So don't waste your time if there's no purpose behind it. What I recommend is think about how is this going to benefit you? How is it going to benefit you as a handball athlete? How could it help you grow? How could it help you improve in a certain task that you complete? How could you overcome an error that you made in a previous situation? So those are the purposes. Think about why am I doing this self-reflection before you before you start doing them. So just before we move on now, again, it's going to start off with a kind of more of a discussion here. There's 2 types of self-reflections that I want you to think about in this workshop. The first one is known as reflection in action. And what this means is thinking about what you're doing, why you're doing it. So for example, I'm doing a workshop right now and I'm reflecting, is it going well? Am I going at the right speed? Am I not going at the right speed? So I'm reflecting right now here in the moment. The second one is known as reflection on action, which is typically what people tend to do more often or they're more aware of, which is when you think about something after it's happened and you think about What went well? What didn't go well? How could I learn from it? What could I do if I was faced with the same situation again? Both of them have their benefits. But what I want you to do first of all is ask this first question in the chat box. What would you say are the benefits of reflecting on your thoughts while you perform? So during a competitive match, what are the benefits of reflecting in that moment? And if you give yourself maybe a minute or two to think about this one, and then once you've got a couple of answers, throw them in the chat box for me. I'll let John kind of share with me what your answers were.
So the first one has come through. So it's can change negative actions.
Oh, I like that. So stopping yourself from making a further mistake is a particularly good one, that one. So there's a great term I like to use called momentum. So if you don't stop yourself making bad mistakes, you can keep getting worse and worse and worse and causing the snowball effect. Oh,
Okay.
I've got.
Can you see that?
Yeah, I can see it now. Yeah, my
Okay.
computer's working with me today. May be able to correct. Yeah, I like that one. Correct a certain skill that you've not performed very well with. Your thoughts were okay, great. So you're thinking about the motivational side. I like that one. So sometimes there's certain aspects of games where you're lacking a bit of the drive or things are going a bit slow. Sometimes those thoughts, if you change your thoughts, it can give you that energy boost. Oh, I like that. Positive thoughts means positive behaviors and vice versa. Very good. Bring you back to, I like that one. Very good. Waste energy, key one, that one, especially if it's habits. If you're ingrained in thinking negative automatically in bad situations, we all know that it's energy draining and it's a waste of time. So if you can pause in that moment and change how you think about something, again, it means you don't waste energy and you can focus back on what you need to do in that moment. Very, very good. Okay, so I like the good answer to that one. Next question though is, what is the downside? What is the downside? So you've got a load of benefits of thinking in that moment. What are the disadvantages of reflecting in that moment on your thoughts? And here's a key one: after making a mistake, what is the downside of reflecting in a game or in that moment? Very good. Yeah. Take away concentration. Even if you focus on positives, you remember that handball especially is a very, very fast-paced game. Oh, I like that. Let your emotions take better of you, get the better of you. If you've not mastered your emotions very, very well and you've opened yourself up to what emotions you're experiencing, yes, they could take over very, very quickly and become very intense. Yeah, again, emotional troubles. It can dent your self-confidence, which is a key one. Narrow focus, very, very good. I like that one. Very simple focus. Sometimes in the game, it's important to have that broad perspective and focus on multiple aspects. Always concentrate on the negatives and never the positives. I like this. It's just coming down to the fact again about if you've not managed to learn how to control your thoughts and emotions, reflect on them could actually lead to worse or more severe impacts. Forgive yourself to stop focusing on the negatives. That's the positive. Yeah, I like that one. Give you a chance to focus and forgive. But again, it will link to the fact it could distract you. Is there any more? Some really good answers. Okay, so I'll kind of summarize. You say that it could narrow your focus. It could take your mind off things that are also important, such as your performance cues, your job responsibilities on the pitch. It could open yourself up to more problems if you've not been able to master your emotions, so things become more intense. So there's two sides to the coin with this type of reflection. And I will teach you within this workshop, sometimes it's better to distract yourself from thoughts and just focus or pause in focus in the present moment and move on to your job responsibility, because sometimes it's not always helpful to focus on your thoughts. So the second one that I introduce you to, if it will work. There you go. The second one I introduced you to was reflecting after a match. So what would you say are the advantages of reflecting straight after a match? What are the benefits? So this one should be a little bit more straightforward. Something you've kind of probably been taught more by coaches to do after matches, reflect on what's happening. The events refresh your mind, yeah. can reflect on all aspects. Weaknesses, I like that one. Action planning. You can get feedback as well. So I like that peer, what we call that is peer reflection, which is very good. Improving your weaknesses. Yeah, okay. Isn't it an interesting point though? So you say you can remember where things have happened and what's happened. Again, a handball match is, correct me if I'm wrong, I think a handball match is 60 minutes. Correct if I'm wrong on that one. I think it's 60 or 80. No, 80. I think it's 80 minutes, sorry. 80 minutes, but that's a long, long time. And a lot of things can happen within that 80 minutes. Reflecting after a match, especially when you're tired, your accuracy of what you're reflecting on could be a little bit distorted because you're tired. Again, when you try to do anything when you're tired, you're never as efficient, never as good about it. So that's the recommendation. 2 times 30. There you go. Thanks, Zhao. So 60 minutes. And there's a lot of things that go on with it. So consider the fact that even though you're saying you can recall more things, the accuracy of those things that you're recalling might be affected, especially if you're particularly tired. Also, as well, I put here what are the disadvantages. One of the disadvantages of reflecting after a match, straight after a match, especially, is if you've had a bad game. And when we've all had that moment when you come out of a bad game, you're feeling frustrated, annoyed, and really, really upset. And there's a lot of negative emotions pumping through you, and they're not easy to get rid of straight away. And I talked about, and you've mentioned this, if you reflect in an emotional state, what you focus on could only be negative and not very, very helpful. So what I recommend is sometimes when you come to reflecting after a match, consider if you're in that right frame of mind to actually reflect on it. And that's why it says that what rules should you consider when reflecting on a performance? And there's a thing known as the 48-hour rule or the 2-day rule, which means sometimes it's better just to give yourself 2 days to allow your emotions to settle, whether that's positive or negative, and then revisit your or reflect on your games. I know coaches will reflect after a match, and a lot of the information they say will go in one ear and come out the other because you're so tired and so exhausted. But 2 days later, when you've had a chance to recover, your mind actually will fact be able to look back at the memories in a more accurate and rational point of view, and you'd be surprised what you can recall, especially if you ask yourself the right type of questions. So I recommend if you've got 2 days, sometimes it's important, if you're going to go into a detailed self-reflection, give yourself 2 days and allow those emotions to settle. So when it comes to reflecting, it's a bit more balanced, it's less emotionally loaded, and it's more accurate. Very cool. So again, I've talked a lot about how to reflect on your thoughts and good examples of doing that. So in the moment after matches, sometimes you might still struggle a little bit. So this is a great way of doing this. And this is known as the ABCs. You might have heard it before. I'm not sure if you've been introduced to this. ABCs are typically done in those more in-depth reflections. So after a match, because it needs the time to do it. And a great way of doing this is, first of all, like I kind of showed you the context, emotions, and thoughts. You start off with thinking, right, what am I reflecting on? What is a particular event? So what I put here is I've been training. And the reason I put this is because you girls have had many moments in the last 9 months where training has been cut short, or you've missed training, or you're not being able to consistently train. So it's a common thing that we've all experienced, and we've all been there. When you miss something that is important, it makes you feel anxious. And what I put here is I put 2 types of beliefs that we can have. And I've not put one, and I'm not talking about changing things. So the type of when it comes to me about in terms of managing your thoughts is it's okay to have negative thoughts and also okay to have positive thoughts. And the first step is just being aware of both of them. Then you can start to choose which ones you want to follow. You don't want to suppress negative thoughts and suddenly start changing them. So the first one is a typical thought: I'm going to be rusty and perform poorly when I return to sport. Just a little heads up in the chat box, who feels this way? So once we get back to some sense of normality and consistent training, who feels that sort of sense? I'm going to feel rusty and perform poorly when I return to sport. Anyone that's got the confidence, put that in the chat box for me. Yeah. Ooh, yep. Yeah, quite a few. I tell you what, even from me, Zhao, and John's point of view, and Sue's point of view, we've got used to kind of doing this online. So if we go back to doing it face to face consistently, we're going to be a bit rusty as well in terms of how we approach it, because we've got to readjust and readapt. Again, this is the thing. When we come to managing our thoughts, we need to evaluate what consequences will those thoughts have on our behavior and our performances. When we follow that triad or thoughts, feelings, behaviors, what I put there on the right hand side is the consequences of thinking that way. It's okay to feel that way, but this is one of the downsides that could happen. So what could lead to is poor motivation or poor effort, because you kind of predict in the future, you're thinking you know what's going to happen. And secondly, you could withdraw. You could even avoid it because you're so anxious about what could happen. You avoid the scenario altogether because you don't want to experience it, kind of protecting yourself. And then you could become irritable and emotional, again, because you're frustrated and annoyed. The second one, which is in green, is a different type of perspective that you could take. So it goes out mistraining. And then I put here, it's completely normal to mistraining due to the current situation regarding COVID-19. And this is a key one. And you probably talked about it, normalizing the negative scenario that you're in. Everybody's had this scenario that they've missed valuable experiences that they needed to develop and keep going forward in terms of making their progression stick. So what I recommend is, first of all, any negative experience you've had due to COVID, just normalize it. It's okay. You've had that. It's completely normal to have gone through that. And also it's completely normal to feel anxious, frustrated and worried about what could happen and being rusty. The second one, though, is I've included a second type of belief, because that first one is you're normalizing, you're trying to calm yourself down. So before really looking into the thoughts, you just go, do you know what? It's okay. It's happened. And I'm sure someone else has had the same experience. So it's okay. Then you then go, because you're more positive, you tend to be a bit more proactive, a bit more forward thinking. You go, right, what can I do to kind of resolve the scenario in terms of what's in control? So you go, I can make up the mistraining by training at home, or practicing some of my skills, which you may have done. Not all skills, but some skills you can do at home. That way, by using these type of thoughts, which are a bit more positive, the consequence can be you feel more calmer about when you return to sport, because you've done more practice, so you're going to feel more prepared. And the key skill is, the more you prepare, the more in control you feel, the more confident you feel within yourself. You're looking forward to it more than anything, because you're just feeling calm about it. You know what? Everybody's in the same scenario. All of us are going to be a bit rusty. So what I want to focus on is just enjoying myself and getting back into the sport that I love doing. And as a result, that will increase your confidence, boost your motivation, and also help you feel more optimistic about the future. So what I'm going to show you now is just a little video to kind of reinforce it. And there's a thing known as the negativity bias. And our brains, as much as we hate saying this, our brains are designed to think think and focus on more negatives. And there's a reason behind it. So I'm going to show you a very, very short 2-minute video. It's a bit cheesy, probably a little bit old, but again, it kind of reinforces the point. And then I want to have a little sum with you girls about kind of how kind of 2020 and COVID is kind of linked to this, and why you probably would have had moments where it was a lot easier to think negatively versus thinking positively. Again, let me know if you can hear the sound. I think I've got it working. Can we hear that just before I move forward?
I could hear something beeping.
That's perfect. That's what I want to hear. Again, yeah. Go past the cheesiness of the video. Think about what the messages that the video is saying. Oh, is that working?
We're really focused on searching out weaknesses and fixing them. And it's not only because we operate on a disease model, but humans actually have something called a negativity bias. I know, it sounds crazy. It basically means the bad things in life hold more weight for us than the good things, and we seek them out. Why? Well, evolution, really. When we were cave people, our negativity bias saved us. Take my well, this old dude. Ooh, ah. Ooh, ooh. Ooh, ooh, ah. As we evolved, our negativity bias became almost second nature for our survival. But in modern society, this bias has other consequences. Think about our relationships. Sometimes we glaze over the good stuff. Like at work. I've got your evaluation here. Looks like you're doing a great job. You're a diligent worker. Clients love you. One thing I think you can improve upon is your punctuality, but as I said, you're doing a great job overall. We tend to focus on the one negative aspect, overlooking all the positive things that are said. This consequence of negativity bias is especially important in our relationships with our family.
Mom, I got my report card. I got an A in math and science.
You got a C in history? Oh, your father's gonna be so disappointed.
This negativity bias affects us in most domains. Scientists show us that the psychological weight of negative to positive events in our mind is 3-to-1. That means for every negative thing we notice, we need 3 positive things to counteract it. By the way, in relationships, that ratio is closer to 5 to 1.
Okay, so I apologize in advance and say you can see the video is a bit cheesy, but it makes a very, very clear message, and the fact that our negativity bias is programmed within us. We've been designed to focus on these negative threats because it helps us survive. Unfortunately, the severity of these threats are kind of lower in everyday life nowadays. Unfortunately, though, because we're still designed that way, it can be very energy draining. It can make us feel very, very low. And you've probably realized that COVID's probably taught you the importance of not allowing yourself to get caught up in those negative moments and kind of have a downhill spiral of negative emotions. And it's taught you probably to pause a little bit and kind of reshift it, the focus on something positive. The stat of around kind of for every negative experience, you need 3 positives to kind of rebalance it. I do go with that rule, but it is mixed. But again, it's a nice rule of thumb to use. If you focus on something negative, consider yourself need to focus on 3 positives. It's a great way of going around. It's a very, very simple rule. The evidence behind it is mixed, but it's a nice simple rule to follow. What I want to do now with that, I want you just to kind of share your experiences, and you kind of did this in the first workshop. Have you found your ability to shift from a negative perspective to a positive perspective has improved throughout COVID and throughout lockdown, either through you trying to train yourself or just kind of being forced because of how many times you felt negative and you felt you had to get to a point where you had to change how you were thinking. So again, just share your experiences about how lockdown has taught you to think more positively. I like that. Oh wow, victim mindset. I like that. Everybody's going through the same thing. Okay. It's kind of like having a kind of reality check with yourself, right? You know what? We need to change how we think about stuff. Gave myself time to develop my positive outlook and accept disadvantages. Some good answers, girls. I'm so impressed, especially for this time this time in the morning on a Sunday. I'm very impressed with your reflective answers. I think as well, going out more is you start again. You talked about you start to appreciate the positive things. The video talked about playing things down, and you realize that sometimes it's important to save those good things and save those positive experiences because it can help you think more positively overall. Okay, brilliant. So what I'm going to show you now is moving on is sometimes typically when it comes to managing those negative thoughts, for example, and being aware of them, sometimes it's important to give them labels and have a framework. And what I'm going to share with you now, and some of the girls might have seen this through the work with Xiao, is a great way is just having a framework. So there is 10 common thinking areas which we all have. And I'm just going to go through each one. Some of these you might be more familiar with, but once you're aware of what kind of thinking areas you may have, or as we call them, unhelpful thinking habits, you can learn to realize actual fact, because it's unhelpful, I need to shift onto a helpful habit. But first of all, you need to be able to label and identify what types of unhelpful thinking habits you're having. So the first one is known as overgeneralizing. So what this means is you make broad claims. So a good example is you make a bad mistake during a game. One instance you make a bad mistake, but instead you say you're bad altogether. You're bad in all aspects of your life because you made one mistake. You're going to make mistakes in all the things you do in your life. The second one is known as labeling, and this is quite a powerful one. So if you call yourself a bad athlete, that's known as a label. The stronger and more negative the label, the more impact it's going to have, and the increased chances you're going to think a certain way. Should and must. This is something we tend to do after reflecting, especially in a negative mindset. We should have done this. We must do that next time. Often, though, when you use the word should or must, it's quite negatively phrased, and it puts you under pressure, and you feel quite anxious about it. So 9 times out of 10, you might fail next time around because you feel under pressure and you're not in that very optimistic, positive mindset. Emotional reasoning. So emotional reasoning is a very, very common one. It's when you allow your perspectives to be guided by your emotions. So for example, after a match, after a bad game, you think everything's bad, everything's rubbish, nothing's good in the world. And that's because your emotions are guiding your perspectives. Again, 9 times out of 10, there is always one thing that you can focus on, which is positive despite a bad overall game. Magnification and minimization. So this is when you magnify the negatives and you minimize the positives, which humans are so good at doing, especially youth athletes. When a coach gives some positive feedback, athletes will often go, nah, I don't believe that. Give some negative feedback, they will believe it, and add fuel to the fire with it. The next 5, and these ones might be more similar to you, or more familiar with you, is mental filtering. So again, very similar to kind of mental kind of minimization. You only tend to focus on certain things. And from that negativity bias, you only focus on the negatives. Jump into conclusions, and every single human is probably their biggest bad habit they have. You try to predict the future and you jump to conclusion. Okay, it's very, very easy to do. Personalization. So this is when a negative event goes wrong or something goes wrong, automatically you take you kind of self-blame. You think it's all your fault. So for example, handball is a team sport, but if you're particularly a leader, for example, like a captain can very easily take the blame on board and feel like he or she is responsible. Sometimes though, when you make it very, very personal, it can be very, very energy draining. Black and white thinking. So this is quite a common one. You have kind of just 2 perspectives. It can either be this way or that way. There's no other perspectives. You're either a good athlete or a bad athlete. And another one, which is probably a term you might be familiar with throughout lockdown and mental health, is a thing known as catastrophizing, which is when one negative thought keeps going round and round and round. It keeps getting bigger and bigger and bigger, and it makes you feel pretty much you become overwhelmed by those negative emotions, those negative feelings, and those negative thoughts. So what I want you to think about now is across those 10 thinking or unhelpful thinking habits in lockdown in general, which ones would you say are your worst top 3 or your most common ones that you do? Again, there's 5 each one. This is the first one, those 5 there, and that one there. What I want you to do is just in the chat box, put your top three thinking habits that you have out of those ones, either in handball matches or in everyday life. If you want, I'll get started. I personally jump to conclusions. That is a classic one for me. Before I've got the facts, I will make a conclusion. I like to kind of take responsibility for bad errors and mistakes, especially in group settings. And I am great at mental filtering. I only like to focus on negatives because I am focused on improving, but sometimes I can play down those positives. Catastrophizing, being there. Shoulding and musting, mental filtering conclusions. 316, black and white. 5, 316, mental filtering, labeling. Yeah, okay. And what I want to say is, when we're talking about identifying the mistakes we probably make or these unhelpful thinking habits, do you know what? It is completely normal. Nothing wrong with that at all. I'm not doing this to make you feel down. I'm just realizing that we're human and we make these mistakes. Well, not even mistakes. We're designed to have these unhelpful thinking habits due to that negativity bias. Your brain has been programmed to think those certain ways because it will protect you. Like a classic one, jumping to conclusions. You want to try and predict the future so you can plan for it. Sometimes though, you plan for like really extreme phase, which often won't happen. And sometimes it can make you feel overly anxious. But again, it's important to be aware of not just the positive things you do, but also the negatives, and realize it's a normal response and it does happen. Okay, great stuff. Again, thank you as well for taking the time to explore on yourself and thinking about what unhelpful thinking habits do I have? Because once you're aware of them, you can then start to look at, right, I don't want to keep doing that because obviously the consequences of following those routes is not helpful for me. Okay, so this is where it comes into action plan and what can we do to change that, and as I call it, pack in your unhelpful thinking. As a psychologist, we love our acronyms, and I've decided to try and be fancy and funny and come up with a acronym to follow. So I created a thing called the PACK phrase. So it's all about packing in your unhelpful thinking, and this has 4 steps, and I'll explore each one in a little bit more detail in a second. The first one is when it comes to, again, acknowledging those thoughts. The first point is just pausing yourself. So again, holding yourself and making sure it doesn't get any worse. So a great way of doing this is just taking a deep breath, and you focus on the present moment by asking yourself, what is happening right now? And it's really important. Just take a deep breath. I mean, you probably heard that multiple times, especially when you made a mistake. Just take a deep breath and focus on what's happening right now. Just ask yourself, where am I right now? What situation am I in? And again, it's just halting those automatic thoughts. And because they're habits, they're really strongly driven to automatically happen, especially when you're in certain situations. The second one is an accepting. This one is all about, right, when you're having thoughts, you've noticed negative thoughts or positive, detach yourself and just think about, they're just there. Observe them. These are thoughts. They're not necessarily facts or the absolute truth. They're opinions, they're thoughts. And kind of what I'd say is try to think about if you were looking at that TV screen and you could see your thoughts on a computer screen or a TV screen. They're just thoughts that are happening right now. They're normal. It's a normal response to the situation that you're in. The third one is, this is kind of where you start to develop a bit of control. You've paused in the moment. You've noticed that you're having both positive and negative thoughts. You might be having more negatives or even neutral ones. Then you can start to decide, right, well, I've already realized from previous experiences, if I think that way, it won't help me. But if I think this way, it's going to help me. So what you do is you choose which thoughts will help you perform and guide you to make the right decisions. Once you've chosen the right one, the fourth and final one is the key one. You commit to it. And commitment is key for anything, including goals. Commit to those beliefs and remind yourself why you thinking to choose that way. Why are you thinking positively? Well, it's going to help you perform better. It'll help you focus. It'll help you make less mistakes. It'll help you get better stats in general. Again, that's the key one. Commit to that way of thinking that is going to help you and remind yourself why you're thinking that way. So just breaking down a little bit more detail and give you a few more tips. When it comes to pause, these are a few ways of kind of going about doing it. The classic way is using your breathing. And a very, very simple way of doing this is, if you pause in the moment, first of all, you start by inhaling. When you inhale, in your head, you count 1. I often find either when it comes to breathing exercise, I tend to do it just through my nose, but you can do it through your mouth and your nose. But what I tend to do is I inhale through my nose once, a deep breath, I count to 1 in my head. I then exhale the breath through my nose, count 2 in my head. Inhale 3, exhale, count 4. And I can go up to 10 if I wanted to. So every inhale is an odd number. Every exhale is an even number. The key point about this is just detaching yourself from the things around you and helping you focus on the present moment. You can use present tense questions. This is about manipulations. This is about giving yourself instructions. What am I focusing on right now? You can visualize a pause button or a stop sign. It's a great way of doing it. Just what is happening right now, just pause. You can perform a behavior. So these are known as cues. So you clap your hands, you pull your socks up, you could jump up and down. But again, you need to attach a kind of cue to it and a reminder. So I'm jumping up and down just to help me pause in the moment. If you don't add that instruction to it or the reason behind it, it'll just be a bit odd, or you won't realize why you're doing it. And finally, briefly focus on something in the environment. So for 10 seconds, just focus on the goal, focus on the floor, focus on your shoes. Again, that brief focus on something random, it just detaches yourself, especially for example, from making a mistake and thinking negatively. Accepting. So the way I do this is through 3 steps. Is you first of all observe. So again, this is a key one, and I mentioned this in the first one. For you to accept it, you need to be aware of it, and you want to say it from a third person and a non-judgmental perspective. And a great way of doing this is just saying, I'm curious I'm curious to see what I'm happening. I'm curious to see what I'm thinking about, what's happening in my world right now. Again, you could imagine your thoughts as an external object. So that way, it's another way of detaching yourself from the thoughts. So again, I said you can imagine you're reading those thoughts on a computer screen. You can imagine someone else saying your own thoughts. That way, you're reducing the emotions that you're feeling and detaching yourself from those thoughts. You then normalize it, completely normal to think both positively and negatively. And then finally, once you've realized it and realize it's a normal phase of your thought processes and your decision making, you can accept it's just happened. It's normal to have these thoughts happen and be generated from these situations because it's giving you information to help you make the right decisions. Once you can accept them, you can then move forward. Coming to choosing it. So choosing is all about evaluating things. So first of all, evaluate which thoughts can help you focus and help you perform better. Comes back to, I think, evaluate the consequences of thinking a certain way. Give yourself instructions. So sometimes, like you talked about, you haven't got enough time to think about all the consequences, think about all the different thoughts. So a great way of getting around that is giving yourself instructions in that moment. And there's a thing known as the rule of three. And this is used kind of by fighter jet pilots in the army because high kind of fast paced, really quick jobs that they have to do. They haven't got a lot of time to think. So what they say to themselves in each moment, they only have 3 things that you want to focus on. Any more than that is information overload. So in this moment, when you're choosing what thoughts you want to focus on, choose on just 3 thoughts that you want to focus on. And then finally, positive possibilities. Think about and remind yourself what positive outcomes could happen if you focus on those positive thoughts. Moving on now into this is the final one and probably the most difficult one, committing to those new way of thinking. And you call it committed action. So committing to those behaviors that will help guide you towards the things that are important to you. So as an athlete, it's important to be competitive, important to put the effort in, important to achieve. Have a gain perspective. So again, this is about positive psychology. Tell yourself, what do I want to gain from thinking this way? Why do I want to be guided by these helpful thoughts? Remind yourself what's important and ask yourself, do those behaviors that you're performing in the game or anything in your life, do those align with those values and what's important to you? Okay, so I've just run out of time. So I'm just going to finish on this one here. This is the final one. Okay, so that approach, packing in those unhelpful thinking, is an approach which you can use during a match. These tips are focused on when you're reflecting after a match. And some of these things I've already mentioned. First of all, when you come to reflecting after a situation, give yourself 48 hours if you've got it. Okay. As we like to say, allow the dust to settle, allow your emotions to calm down before you start encountering and exploring in an in-depth reflection. Start with the positives, because if you start with a negative, especially after a bad game, it could impact the accuracy and the realism of your reflection due to your emotions. And negative emotions can maximize the negative. Maximize the negatives. It can filter out important information. You could catastrophize certain things as you learn with those 10 common unhelpful thinking habits. Thoughtful action. So this is key one. When you reflect on something, always finish it with an action point. How am I going to use this information? How am I going to use this reflection to help me grow and help me improve? If you don't finish it with any action point, it's a waste of time. And the whole point of an athlete is moving forward and continually learning about what you need to improve and how you can grow as an athlete. And I said here again, start to execute this action within 48 hours. And it's the same with allowing the dust to settle. When you put an action plan in place, if you leave it too long, or you say you'll do it in a few minutes, it's a classic phrase, I'll do it later. If you leave it too later, you forget about doing it. So again, when you give yourself an action point, do it as soon as possible or within the next 48 hours. And the final one, use multiple methods of review to evaluate how your thoughts impact your behaviors and your performance. And you guys talked about this. Use other people, use your coaches, use your players, use your teammates, use video analysis. Loads of different ways to go about doing it. The more methods you use, the more accurate your overall reflection will be and the more helpful it will be. So we'll finish it there. So I'll finish with this one. What is on your mind, girls, from this reflection? And is there any questions from the workshop that's been done today? Thank you very much.
Thanks, Casper. I think don't have anything in the chat. So is there anything anyone needs to ask Casper? So our expectation is that following this session, you go back to the workbooks and finish off M1, M2 and M3 and have some actual plans to put into place as we come back into the new year and do a bit of handball. I guess on that one, your penultimate point there, Casper, is I guess the question I was asked thinking was how many of us have set New Year's resolutions that start tomorrow?
Yeah.
So we set them for the beginning of the new year. And
Yeah,
I'm not necessarily a massive fan of New Year's resolutions myself, but I've kind of gone, but I'll wait till the 4th to start. And then obviously when we get to tomorrow, we've lost that initial surge of momentum and motivation to do so.
Yes, again, those 48 hours are key. Is there any points, girls, from in the chat box? I mean, how have you found the first session on the kind of? I know introducing to the concept of managing your thoughts is quite a difficult one to get around. How have you found it? Is there any kind of any comments on or kind of what you've listened to today?
Nope, all is quiet.
Oh, there's one.
Okay, Alice.
It's a good point. I don't know. I have time to fully think in the way. Okay, I like that. Takes time, Alice. For example, the pack one is more of a simple way of doing it. But the more you do it, the more you practice it, the more efficient you can become at doing it. Or you can use just certain aspects of that pack approach, whether that's just pausing, whether it's just distraction, or just simply accepting what's going on around you.
And is that, Casper, is that one where, because handball is such a dynamic sport, it's important to build in almost like you talked about breathing, almost to consciously use a breath when you're maybe in transition. So
yeah,
assuming Alice's sort of question was about, let's say, making a mistake in attack, is as you transition back to defense and set back up into your defensive structure, taking a breath, consciously taking a breath to then get you back into that defensive frame of mind.
Yeah, it's that transition from you leave one situation to the next one, because the things that have happened in the past you can't control. So by having a simple pause, even if it's just the breath, it's a shift and you can restart that mindset.
Cool.
All right. Well, thank you for the comments, girls. What I'll do is with the work booklet, obviously those first two sections there is 10, I think there's 10 or 11 characteristics that you need to define. Hopefully the main tips I want you to take away from this is when you reflect on those 10 characteristics, reflect on how personally do those characteristics relate to you, and also reflect on where are you currently at with each one. And if you've got any issues or have any trouble setting goals, again, you've got contact myself, John, or Zhao, or Sue with any guidance that you may need to have. Any other comments, John, or Zhao, or Sue?
Nothing from me.
Just to add that handball, like all the players know, it's a very decision-making game, and those decisions cannot be too much affected on the psychological part. So that breathing that we were talking about in transition, in passing, a lot of times we speak with goalkeepers or with the players. I can give the example for the goalkeepers because normally they are not too much of our concern, but okay, a goalkeeper makes a save or the ball goes out and he needs to really be in the position to breathe, to assess, to screen all the options that he has to do a first wave pass. So that situation applies to all actions in the game. The game is very fast. They need to think and to execute very, very suddenly, but that mindset, that free of negative thoughts are one of the things very very important in the high performance, for sure.
Thank you, Joe. It's very good points. Good summarising that. I guess I would finish it there. I'll finish it there. Girls, well done for doing the workshop of 2021. You're probably mentally drained from all those questions. So again, thank you very much for those sharing the answers, and again, investing the time in answering the questions I gave you. Thank you.
Great, and we'll see you all at 11 o'clock with Sue for some health and safety. Thanks, Casper. Thanks, everyone.